Welcome to Leadership Development News, profiles of top performers. I'm Dr. Relly Nadler. Dr. Kathy Greenberg is here with me. We're moving on to celebrate 20 years of this podcast. We'll be at the start of the new year, so we're excited about that. We always bring great guests to help you improve your performance. We love the emotional intelligence model. We're really excited today. Does your team have emotional intelligence? And so we got Vanessa Druskat, who's been studying and researching this for a long, long time. And she has a brand new book that we're going to get into. She's got some great tools and tips about developing your teams. So, Kathy, welcome.
Well, hello there, my partner of 20 years. Um, I guess we must be a good team from an emotional intelligence standpoint because we've been able to last this long. And it's so exciting for us to be going into our 20th year, and it blows my mind that we have been talking about this subject for so
Yeah.
long. And people are really just catching up. And I think there's so much more that we have to share with our audience. So I look forward. I don't necessarily want to be doing this for the next 20 years, but I certainly look forward to doing it for at least another decade.
Okay, good, good, good. Well, thank you, Kathy. So we love doing this because both Kathy and I are avid learners. We've been in the field for a long time. I'm interested to hear from Vanessa. We're going to do just a little bit of information about kind of why this model of emotional intelligence. And Vanessa will bring you on in just a moment, but we've had Daniel Goleman, two or three different times on this. And so his book, Emotional Intelligence in 1995, kind of started me off saying, well, okay, so those are the things that I had in a master's program that was called confluent education. Took some of the information from UMass that had affective education. So out in Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, they took a lot of that information from UC Mass and Esalen and turned it into confluent. Thinking and feeling come together in a confluence. Well, it was all feeling. And so when Goleman's book came out in 1995, I remember thinking, oh, that's just like my master's program. And so have been using that as an organizational principle, in the work that both Kathy and I do, executive coaching, leadership development, training, lots and lots of team stuff. So I'm excited this, what got me involved in the team stuff was working for Outward Bound for many, many years. And I was going to ask you about this. I have a colleague, I'll save that for a moment, who's at UNH, who's an Outward Bound type person, and you may know him. So let me just share some of the data and then we'll jump right into it. So when you think about this idea of emotional intelligence, the boss's degree of emotional intelligence was linked to 70% of the worker's performance. So the boss having emotional intelligence helps everybody. Well, today we're going to go expand that even more and talk about the team emotional intelligence. And I'm excited with that. And so, Kat, you want to introduce Vanessa?
You bet. I think one of the things I just want to preface this introduction to our guest today with is when we think of brilliant leaders or their team members and how they become all together, right, unified as top performers, it takes looking beyond the individual, right? It takes understanding the collective emotional skills of the team. And exceptional teams stand apart from others by building on emotionally intelligent ecosystems, not just the EI of the leaders or the employees alone. So, unlike most emotionally intelligent teams, develop social norms and routines that motivate teamwork by building a genuine sense of belonging among the team members. And these norms prioritize team member feedback and development and encourage constructive debate that produces effective decisions and novel ideas, which we know come from the decision-making component of emotional intelligence. So today's guest, Vanessa Druskat, is an associate professor at the Peter T. Paul College of Business and Economics at the University of New Hampshire. And as an internationally recognized leadership and team performance expert, Vanessa advises leaders and teams at over a dozen Fortune 500 and Fortune Global 500 companies. Her best-selling Harvard Business Review article with S. Wolff on emotionally intelligent teams has been chosen 6 times for inclusion in collections of HBR's most valued articles, and she is the recipient of multiple research and teaching awards. You can get more information on Vanessa and her work at www.vanessa.druskat, DRUSKAT.com, or you can reach out to her at vanessa.druskat@unh.edu. Vanessa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me and that for that lovely introduction. And I am loving listening to you talk about emotional intelligence. I'm happy to join the conversation, but it's just pure pleasure listening to the two of you.
Well, Vanessa, that's what's so fun about this because we're just, colleagues who have a lot of similar focus and how we help people, and so just tapping each other's brains. So yeah, this is gonna be fun. So say a little bit, I sent you that article, why 10 reasons why teams need emotional intelligence. I have a blog on Psychology Today. And it wasn't until I looked up that I know your article that I read a long time ago, 2001. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes. 20,
So,
20 something years ago, right? Yes.
so we're really glad you kind of now you have a lot of this in your book, but say a little bit about you kind of your background, some of the major influences that you've had.
Sure. Well, I was always interested in teamwork from the time I was young. I started working at the age of 12 on farms.
Hmm.
And I also joined, sports teams when I was young and had such great early work team experiences and sports team experiences. And then when I got to the workplace, it just wasn't what I had
Right.
imagined it would be. And, people were competitive. But the worst part was that I found myself just becoming like all the others around me. So where I'd used to been, I used to be so supportive of people in my teams. Now all of a sudden I was as competitive as everyone else. So anyway, I went back to graduate school and started studying teams. And really, like you, I bumped into some folks who were teaching how to facilitate teams by asking people to read the emotion in the room.
Hmm.
So I took a team facilitation course when I was in my doctoral program at National Training Laboratories in
Right.
Bethel, Maine. Sure. And I was just blown away when they said, "Well, Vanessa, it's your turn to facilitate. Look at the emotion." And I was like, "What are you talking about? I'm a doctoral student. I'm reading these, theories of blah blah blah." And lo and behold, it just blew me away that everything you needed to know to facilitate was on the faces and the nonverbal expressions, which nobody had been thinking about. Shortly after that, Dan Goleman's book came out
Right.
and that changed everything. And then Dan Goleman and Richard Boyatzis knew I'd been thinking and talking about emotion in teams, and they asked me to write a chapter for a book they were compiling
Hmm.
that would conceptualize what an emotionally intelligent team would look like. And everyone expected me to just say, well, you just average the emotional intelligence, you get a bunch of emotionally intelligent people in the room, and
Right.
ta-da, there's your team. And no, that's not what I wrote about because I knew that to be untrue. I just even had to tap into my own and others' experience, which is that I knew I could be empathetic or I could be extremely unempathetic in a competitive team. And so I started, looking at the norms, which are the routines, which are very predictive of behavior in teams. As you
Mhm.
may know, the biggest predictor of behavior in a group or team is what everyone else does. It's what are the routines, So if
Mhm.
if if um, if every team has norms, I can talk more about what these are. But
Right.
so anyway, my research started looking at the norms and um, anyway, let me stop there and ask you
Yeah.
what you want to ask
You
after
know,
that.
you know what's fascinating to me as I'm listening to you is that um, I pivoted uh, over a decade ago to work with special operations, special forces, and public safety professionals who do special response teamwork. And when you talk about sitting in a group and trying to read their emotions, that is impossible.
Oh,
Because
interesting.
they
Interesting.
all have resting bitch face.
Yeah.
In
That's the
their
norm. That's probably the norm.
That's the norm.
Right, right.
So what I find with these folks who I love and adore, because I married one of them, my husband is
Mhm.
one of them. What I've learned is how to get them to laugh and get them to really show who they are behind that mask before we engage, because that
Wow.
is their way of setting their boundary. And if you don't
Yes.
know how to get beyond that, you're
Interesting.
never going to get to the emotional intelligence routines or norms or insights or anything else. So as you were saying that, I'm sitting here laughing at all the times, hundreds of times I've walked into meetings with these beautiful people who have no affect and who look like they're pissed off to be there. So very different environment where I was in corporate America for 25 years. But it's fascinating to me that you just need to know how to break through to get everybody to come to the table.
It's such a great story, Kathy. Yeah, and it's a metaphor for what you need to do in corporate America as well, because
Right.
they might not have resting bitch face, but they also have a way of being, that is not necessarily what would lead to a collaborative environment where people are lifting one another up and working together well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the challenge, and this is why I'm excited. I have your book, and I have a group that I'm going to be working with on Thursday, and a lot of the, we do some similar stuff, obviously, with teams. But what I think was so challenging with teams, and Kathy, you're saying it in a certain way, you think of all the thoughts that everybody on that team is having, and they're all invisible. And then
Yeah.
you have the leader trying to bring together and everybody, that the right hand, left hand column, from the fifth discipline,
Yes.
so the left hand column, what they're thinking, this is dumb, this is a waste of time. I got plenty of stuff I got to do. So and so doesn't know what they're talking about. All that stuff is invisible. And so say a little bit about kind of I know a lot of this is going to be around the norms, but why the emotional intelligence of the leader isn't as important as the whole team culture.
Well, first of all, let me say the emotional intelligence of the leader is very important,
Hmm.
in particular because my hypothesis is that you need to know that the people in front of you are emotional beings. I mean, you need to be noticing emotion in the room and caring about emotion in order to build a really optimal team. That's my guess. What we do find in our research that the emotional intelligence of the leader impacts whether or not the team becomes emotionally intelligent.
Okay.
But what we miss a lot when we train leaders, team leaders, is that teamwork is about the relationships between the members, among the members, if you
Hmm.
will. So we teach leaders how to have, interpersonal interactions or how to manage themselves. And what they really need to be doing is developing relationships and emotionally intelligent interactions among the members. Members need to lift one another up. And so we can talk about that, how norms enable that outcome. And we don't teach that to leaders.
As you look at these routines that you're reviewing in an ecosystem of a culture, I think it's fair to say, and really, I'd love your thoughts on this as well as Vanessa's, as people who come in and help organizations, which we all do, recognize and develop self-awareness for better decision making, for better reality checking, for better problem solving, for better overall awareness of the needs for things like independence or empathy. We have to take the first step into identifying what that environment is. And I know each of us probably has a way to approach that. I'm really curious, Vanessa, when we talk about a leader's emotional intelligence and how much it matters, how do you assess the leader's emotional intelligence, the norms of the culture, and how you might set up an approach to setting the team culture on the right path?
Sure. Well, anytime I work with a team, I always begin by working with the leader. And, talking to the leader, finding out what their aspirations are, finding out their thoughts, obviously why they bring us in, and telling them, excuse me, if we're going to work with the team, we're going to need them to be a team member for a while. So they're going to need, when we work with teams, we assess the current norms. We include the leader in that assessment and in the discussion because we want the team to own the norms. Now, you can tell pretty quickly a leader's emotional intelligence when you start talking like that, right? And then you need to coach more or less around how to behave. And I can tell you a lot more about what it's like if you're interested to work with people who initially think that's ridiculous, or people who we never crack, we never reach.
Yeah.
And so they never want to let go. Like one leader who wanted us to lie about the scores on the team's norms
Wow.
results because he felt like it was a reflection of him.
Yep, been there, done that. And it's ridiculous
Yes.
to say that, right? I mean, it's true. There, and the one thing, and Relly, you and I think because we're both partners with MHS and the EQI 2.0 assessments, that we follow very strict rules around that. And as a result, we can't get ourselves put into a corner to do those kinds of things. But it's fascinating, and Relly, I love your insight on this. When a leader does that, that immediately tells you a lot about
Right.
self-awareness and the emotional
Yes.
Yeah.
insight that person has, right?
Yes, indeed.
So I'll just make a quick comment and then we'll go to our first break. Because I've worked with teams a lot and often, and I'm sure you've seen this, both Kathy and Vanessa, let's say I'm working at a level below the executive team
Hmm.
and they like it and they're enthused about it and say, this is great. Then immediately someone says, are they doing this?
Right,
Is my boss doing this? Because they really see that, yeah, we're embraced, but the culture really starts from the top.
right.
And so let's come back to Kathy's question. We're going to take our first break, and then we'll be right back. So don't go away.
Welcome back to Leadership Development News. We're having an engaging conversation here around teams with our guest. And, Vanessa, when we went to break, we were talking a little bit about working with the leader first and making sure that the norms are apparent to us, or at least visible to us. And the unfortunate situations that many of us have been in over our careers where the not so good information that might be associated with a leader in particular can often be very threatening. And so we have all worked for leaders who think that they need to hide that and cover it up, which is really the meat of the reason we're there to begin with, right? So
Yes,
we
yes.
talked a little bit about using assessments and then focusing on the norms. Um, when you think about the successful projects that you have done, I assume there's some skills enhancement in there and then some intentional practices, but give us a little bit of an insight into what are the best norms to implement in a team as a first step to shift that culture so we don't get caught in a corner with a leader that doesn't want to reveal what he thinks or she thinks
Hmm.
might be associated with their leadership. Could be a remnant of something that's been there a long time, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, we don't, back to what I said earlier, we don't teach leaders how to build teams. We teach them how to have emotional intelligence or we coach them around things, but I get a lot of calls from leader coaches saying all the leaders' problems are about the team. What do I do? But we don't teach people how to do it, and that's been what my work has been all about. But um one of the most important things for leaders to know is that they set the tone. And you know this. I mean, they set the norms. So it's the leader. If you don't get the leader to step back and look at the current norms with the team and say what's working, what's not working, then the leader isn't not necessarily going to be open to changing them. So, so to be more specific here, what I usually do is say, look, um, if the team doesn't own these norms, then they're not going to, it's not going to make a difference. Okay. So let me give you an example of a couple of key norms that make a difference, which is what your question was, Kathy. One of these, we have three categories of norms that make a difference. One of them, right in the middle category, which is about the team task, is about assessment. And so what we recommend is that teams focus on, a growth mindset and that they're constantly looking at their current operations, their current level of success, and they're figuring out what's working well, what's not working well, what do we need to tweak. And so that's a norm that we've seen in super high performing teams, and we bring that to our model of Team EI. So that I find that really important, and I find that the assessment needs to be what are the current norms. So here's an example. We have a norm that's called caring behavior, which is about respect. So do we care? Do we lift one another up? Do we look for the good in one another? And typically what we find is that the team will have a mean, on a 1 to 5 scale. It'll be maybe the mean will be 3.5 or 3.9 or 4. But what we're really interested in is the range of responses. Because you always have, and by the way, the leader's in there filling this out. You always have the leader and a couple of informal leaders in the team, people with status, who think there's a ton of caring behavior in that team, and they give it a 5. Question is, what does the tail look like? How many
Right.
people in that team don't think this team, you know, demonstrates care and respect to all members? And when you look at that tail, it tells you something about the team, which is that some people are getting heard and some people aren't. And that's really a recipe for poor decision making
Yeah.
or groupthink or all the negative things that we see. So if a team is willing to look at its norms and look at the tail, on all these norms, then you can start and you can say, all right, where do we begin? What do we need to strengthen here? And the leader needs to be part of that conversation, but the team has to have a voice in that because remember, this is about how team members interact with one another. I can say more about that, but I want to pass it over
Yeah.
to you because I want to hear your awesome ideas.
Well, and so I think that's the foundation, and that's in your three-step model. And then for our audience, you should get her a book because it's, for practitioners like me and Kathy, it's got really a lot of how-to, and that's been my focus around emotional intelligence and teams is kind of the how-to. But here's a good example. Maybe you can kind of deal with this around the team norms. Sometimes, and I saw this earlier leading these outward bound groups, that things would be going really, really well, and then somebody would be outside the circle, and I would call it the sledgehammer effect.
Yeah.
They would make a comment and it's like a sledgehammer, and the team would vibrate and go, "Oh, what are we going to do about that?" And then they look to the leader because
Yes.
now there's someone who's not operating with a norm.
Yeah.
And so maybe say a little bit about that, any examples that you may have, because that one or two comments and those one or two team members undermine everything.
Yes. Okay. So, first of all, if you've got a norm in place and it gets efficient, which is that you're constantly assessing, then you're in better stead for something like that because you
Right.
can say, okay, let's take a look at what a Chris just said. Whatever Chris just said, let's, what is that something that we need to deal, where are we around this? So that's the first thing I want to say. Second thing is the outliers are the key to innovation.
Mm,
So, what I've learned in my 30 years of studying teams in organizations and talking to leaders and working with teams with this thought in mind is that, first of all, 5% of those outliers are just crazy people. And you want to just get out of their way. Okay, thanks, Chris. We'll consider that. But 95% of them are the canary in the mine that sees something first.
Yeah. Huh.
And I got to tell you, it's the canaries in the mine that
Wow.
move teams forward. So the question is, what do we think about this? You know,
Yeah.
and so I take those Chris's when we do an norm assessment and we discuss and we put the thing up. Surely Chris is the one, one of the. You never really know. Everybody thinks it's Chris down there. It's the one. While other people are closer up. Frankly, I know who scores what. Nobody else does, and it's often
Right.
not that Chris. But anyway, it's more than Chris. Um, but what I find is that you can. Now this sounds kind of Pollyanna-ish, but I can't tell you how many times I've brought Chris's along by giving them voice and control and opportunity to
Hmm.
say what's frustrating them. Often there's somebody who doesn't feel like they have any control. They can't force belonging on people. They don't feel respected. They don't feel in, they feel out. And
Hmm.
all the research shows that if you don't feel like you belong, it's an intractable problem because you can't make yourself belong. People have to invite you in.
Hmm.
So and what happens to people like that is they lose their ability to manage their emotions. So there's been meta-analyses on this, and it's people are like, why do they behave so badly? Well, first of all, when they ingratiate, when they try to be nice, it doesn't do any good. You can't make yourself belong. And so then they prioritize, this is meta-analysis, people running these meta-analysis say it seems like they're prioritizing control over getting along at some point. And so
Hmm.
control is just making those outlandish claims and hitting the sledgehammer down and saying, well, you can't kick me out. I'm kicking myself out first.
That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
yep. As you're talking, I think one of the things that at least resonates with me is everybody's temperament
Yeah.
in the room,
Right.
right? And so the three of us have that advantage when we go into an organization to do work because there's a lot of planning that goes up front. And one of the things that I learned from one of our good friends, Marshall Goldsmith, very long time ago,
Hmm.
when I worked with him independently at Accenture, is when you do an interview prior to the team getting together,
Yes.
always ask this question. Do you want all the team members to be successful in this endeavor?
Wow. Wow.
And if you get one or two people who consistently create a list of the bad people that they really don't support, then going in there, if that Chris, this euphemistic Chris that we're referring to,
Hmm.
is wanted or not wanted. And then you also have to spend some time with Chris before that meeting and make sure Chris really wants to be a member of that team because
Right.
right, we as the people who are doing this emotionally intelligent team building have to recognize that there are going to be, as you said, there are going to be some stretch goals around whether an individual wants to continue to be a member of that team or whether the members of the team really want them to be a part of what they're doing. So I think you've nailed something here that I want to make sure the audience is hearing, which is the pre-work to
Yeah.
getting in front of that team is where you spend the effort
Yeah.
and making sure that you have all of the information that you can possibly get about their unique attributes, their lives, a pattern of life, if you will, is what we call it in, the military and DoD, and their working styles
Hmm.
so that you don't get trapped as the facilitator or
Hmm.
the coach or the consultant
Hmm.
helping them balance their socializing and productivity and all the other things they need to do in this facilitated discussion. So I want to just make sure that I heard that correctly from you.
Oh yeah. I mean, and let me say this. I think that you've just really captured it well, Kathy. And this is also something that the leader needs to do. And this is also something that the team needs to do. The first norm in our model is get to know one another well.
Hmm.
Get to know one another's strengths and weaknesses and styles.
Yeah.
And, I have a friend who's a facilitator, and that when he launches a team, he gives each team member 7 minutes to tell their story.
Mm.
And he says those 7 minutes change everything in the team because
Wow.
all of a sudden you find out, much about this individual and the way they think and their strengths and weaknesses. I cannot imagine a great team in which members don't know one another's strengths and don't lift one another up.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's two ways we could take this conversation, but I want to take it in one direction just for a second. There's a really interesting study that was done with NBA players. And I'm not going to give you all the details. You're going to have to trust me on a lot of
Uh-huh.
it. But what they looked at were how many times team members touched, high-fived, chest bumped, slapped them on the rear, whatever they do in those NBA
Right.
games. And what that did, okay, so they controlled for all kinds of things. What they found was that, first of all, team members who were touched more often performed better.
Yeah.
Okay. And they controlled it in such a way that it wasn't that those already were the high performing members. What they found was that when you touch someone more, they performed better. Okay.
Yeah.
And they also found that the teams where members touched one another more perform better. What ends up happening is when you're touched by other people, and this is kind of crazy because it's not a good metaphor for organizations because we certainly don't touch one another,
Right. Right.
but they were more selfless. They passed the ball more rather than shooting.
Mm.
They
Yeah.
supported one another
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
So the idea here is how do we lift one another up? And where does that begin? I think it has to begin by valuing one another and getting to know one another. At least this is what I've learned from the highest performing teams I've studied. And
Yeah.
so a lot of my research has been going into organizations and
Yeah.
finding the highest performance and looking at what they do differently. And I'll tell you, they know one another's likes,
Right.
dislikes,
Right.
proclivities. How do I give someone feedback? Anyway, that's just
That's,
thanks for listening to that little
Yeah.
lecture. I'm a
no,
teacher,
no,
so
no,
I like
No,
to
it's a
talk.
that's great.
gorgeous,
As
gorgeous.
you were starting, I was thinking you were going to talk about that study because I know that study,
Oh, good.
and I love basketball, and you can see because it's first of all, what's great about basketball is only 5 players. We're in football season. You have 12 on one side, 12 on the other side, or maybe it's 11. You got a lot of players. But so when someone does a great pass, they point to each other. Everybody sees that you
Right.
you gave me an assist. And then the other thing that you can use, the most valuable player last year in the professional sports in NBA, SGA is his name from Oklahoma. Anytime he does an interview afterwards, typically it's always the leader. He always has his team behind him. So I've never seen that before. But every
Wow.
interview after a game, his whole
Yeah.
team is there. And so he's the leader and
Yep.
he's saying, look, I'm not having an interview being on TV without my whole team behind me.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Interesting.
So give us the layout because I know this is moving fast. Like give us the layout of your book. You got your 3 kind of key areas. Give us that and then we'll zero in more.
Sure. So let me just tell you that, first of all, the three key areas were built on the research that I did for years, which was
Right.
going into organizations, finding the best teams, finding the average teams that did the exact same task, and just looking at how they did it differently, what the norms were in the best that were different, that made them so good. And looking at that, tracking that across a number of different industries. So anyway, we found three categories of norms, and one of them fits right into something that Kathy said earlier, which is, I think back to Marshall's idea. The first category is how we support one another's success. And so we've got three norms in that category, one of which is giving one another feedback, which is a hard one to kick off, but The second cluster is about how we advance and learn together as a team. And so again, this is a set of norms, four norms, where you really focus on getting all voices into this analysis of what are we doing well, what do we need to change, what are we optimistic about, what are we pessimistic about, are we looking ahead? There's four norms that we've seen that great teams use to get that sort of future focus, adaptability, et cetera. And then the third one is reaching out outside your boundary to talk with your customers and clients and with people outside, with coaches, if you will, like yourselves, that can give us new ideas, that can give us new ways. So these great teams are humble enough to know they don't have everything they need
Right.
inside the team.
And that's so powerful because if they don't have a good relationship with that group of outsiders, how are they going to get the honest, unvarnished truth so that they can support each other with feedback and advance and learn together in the
Yeah.
team? So it's a beautiful learning loop there that you've just described, and it's so powerful.
So let me just highlight for our people who don't have the book, I have the book in front of me. So you talk about, I'm just going to list this really fast and then we'll zero in. Team fundamentals. They need to have clear goals, roles and responsibilities, and an effective meeting process. That's kind of the beginning. And so
Yes.
as you're bringing with the
Foundation.
team, but then your three areas, team norms, understand team members you talked about, demonstrate caring. And I imagine you have an assessment that goes with this, address unacceptable behavior. So that I'm sure is always one of the lowest scores. And then you go to learn and advance, like you mentioned, review the team, support expression, build optimism, solve problems proactively versus reactively. So that's a big one. And then, like you mentioned, around stakeholders, understand team context, building externals. So say a little bit about, I think because just like you said, they don't have team skills, they don't have conflict skills. I mean, most of us avoid conflict. So you got conflict.
Yes.
Um, how do you bring that to the surface and any tips and tools that you do?
Yes, well, first of all, a lot of that comes through. We strongly recommend within that under that first bucket of norms that you talk about how people feel about conflict and what
Yes.
their, how if they like to be disagreed with, how do they like to
Yeah.
be disagreed with? I mean, if they don't like to be disagreed with, how can we do it well? And so we make that part of the conversation. But what we find in these teams is that if you don't allow conflict, I mean, one of the reasons why you build the foundation is so that you can have
Mm.
conflict. If you don't have trust and safety, which these norms build, um, you can't have disagreements. Disagreements, and that's all part of that middle bucket of norms, which is that everyone's voice gets heard, regardless of whether you agree or disagree. And by the way, when I'm about to disagree with someone with higher status than me, I literally get an error message in my brain that says, "Look out." And
Uh-huh.
so you have to have a norm that encourages it. And so we talk one of our norms in there, which is support expression, which is about how you continually encourage people to disagree with one another, and that you build that into the process. So um, anyway, I,
Yeah.
I I would love to hear what you all do around this because I'm sure
But
you have some really good
so
ways of managing it
I'll
yourself.
answer it real fast and give it to you, Kat. So I think so because I've done the kind of the norming process every time with a team, leaders' expectations of the team, team's expectations of the leader. Each person shares for me to be my best. Here's what I need of you. And then for the leader to say, okay, and kind of respond to that. And then the third part is team norms. And so that's the part you're saying, and really establishing those team norms. And I think what
Awesome. That's
uh,
awesome, really. I love that.
okay, thank you. And then I think what you said, doing this stuff up front, because I always say this is from Alcoholics Anonymous, you have to name it to tame it. Oh, remember we talked about when conflict happens? Now we have conflict. No, remember we talked about we're going to go through storming? Oh, now we have storming. That really helps because otherwise they think something's wrong.
Yes, yes. And they don't want to hurt relationships. They don't want to hurt what they've built so far. Anyway, go ahead, Kathy. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to say we are at that witching hour because we need to get a little break in here. But when we come back, we'll definitely jump into a little bit more of this conversation with our guest, Vanessa Druskat. Don't go away. We'll be right back. You're listening to Leadership Development News.
Welcome back to Leadership Development News. We're talking with Vanessa Druskat. Vanessa with two S's, Druskat, Druskat, hername.com. You can find out a lot more about her book. You can find out about she has an assessment that allows you to go to these 3 different areas that she talked about. And Vanessa, we've been having a little too much fun here. I'm just going to plug the experiential group projective technique. So we've talked about Outward Bound and why I'm so enthused with it. Within moments, you get the team culture. There's this one activity that I do, if I can, every time. Within 10 seconds, because they don't know how to do it, it's an I gotcha exercise. They immediately, because the brain's saying, what's the problem? What's the problem? They immediately go to who's the problem. And then they start pointing fingers at each other. And whoever they point fingers at each other says, no, it's not me. So within you have blaming and defensiveness in 10 seconds. And that's who we are as humans.
Yes.
And so well, let me just say anything you want to say about that, and then we'll get to the questions. Because I'm sure you kind of see, let's say, blaming and defensiveness as 2 kind of key things that go on in a team.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the way we're wired to look at individuals, to not look at what's going on in the system. And that's, I mean, you and I are simpatico in teaching people that it's about the situation we're in that's creating this. It's not the individuals.
Right.
And that's, I think, most important. Leaders need to know that. Leaders need to know the power of the system on the individual behavior. So I just want to hear more. Yeah.
Well, we want to hear from you, so thank you.
Okay, good. Okay.
So go ahead,
Yeah.
Kat. You can ask our next question.
Well, we're going through this so quickly today, which is just a testimonial to the excitement and the energy around this subject, Vanessa, that you have been writing about for over 30 years. And I think one of the things that I really want to hear about is how do you recommend that the team handles conflicts that arise from personality differences? Because I see a lot of this in special response teams. These guys and gals, either they really have a great relationship and they embrace each other and they understand each other well enough to know what not to step on, inside the team, because nobody wants, an explosive device to go off.
Right.
And you don't really get a lot of the dynamics that you would get in the corporate environment, because these folks really do rely on life and death together. It's
Sure.
a quarterly report.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how you handle conflicts this way.
Well, I try to head them off. So, back to the most important norm in our model is one that we have labeled understand team members, which is getting to know their personality styles and how they work, how they prefer to work, and talking about differences among ourselves, how each person thinks through problems.
Yeah.
And so we turn that into a routine where you don't just do a personality survey once, you do many of them constantly, and you're always looking at these things, but you do them efficiently, right? So you can, if you look in my book, you'll see that it's not something I want teams to have to spend a lot of time on, but I do want them to prioritize getting to know one another's differences.
Right.
And so, I mean, I could talk more about that, but it took me a long time to figure out how important that norm was or why it was so important. And I used to go to audiences and say, tell me, why is this important? And they couldn't tell me. But, in order to belong, you have to be known. You have to feel known. Now I know more about it. So anyway, like all conflicts, as long as it's not we differentiate. I'm sure you two know about this between what we call a personal conflict and task conflict.
Whoa.
So if you're going to insult me, then I'm going to stop it right there. And task conflict is about what we're talking about, and whether we're talking about what we're doing or how we're going to do it. It's about the task. What happens is that task conflict almost always morphs into personal conflict.
Right.
Well, of course, really, you don't like anything I do. So I didn't
Yeah.
expect you to like this. All
Right.
right, there we go. There we go. But so I advocate for stopping for the personal level
Right.
and creating space for the differences and then repairing afterwards.
Right.
Taking the time to step in and say and give each other some love. There's a way to do it.
And
That's
this is where I think, like you said, and what's so great about teams, they don't learn these skills. And so they really do need skills. I mean, anytime I talk about teams, what do we know about sports? What do they do all the time? Practice, 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 practice. We're watching football now, in football season. If you had a stopwatch on how much time they're actually playing, it's 14 minutes. We're
right,
watching for 3 hours.
right.
And then what do we know about the corporate world? It's the exact opposite. Perform, 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 perform. If they bring you in or me and Kathy, maybe that is that small amount of time of practice. So how are they expected to know all this stuff? And I think that the skills, I'm sure you do, like you said, around disagreement, but then the other key one is feedback. How do you give feedback that is constructive? They do it the way their boss did it, which may not be constructive.
Right. So that's why you got to create a norm around it. You got to talk about it as a team and say, how are we going to do this?
Right.
And come up with and see this is my big I think it's impossible to hire all emotionally intelligent people with all these skills
Yeah.
and then put them into a team and expect it just to be fine. I think you got to come up with, routines for how we're going to do this. You got to talk about it, like you said, in advance, ahead of time. We are going to disagree. What are we going to do? Okay, we just had a disagreement. How did that go? What do we need to do now? What do we need to tweak? Yeah, practice it and keep getting better and better. That's what I see in the great teams.
Yeah. Go ahead,
I'm
Kat.
going,
Yeah,
yeah,
please.
I just was going to your book here for a second, Vanessa. And I just want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to go take a look at the emotionally intelligent team building collaborative groups that
Mm.
outperform the rest.
So
And let me tell everybody, you get the first 50 pages that you can review for free, which is very
oh,
generous of you, by the way. And I think it's well worth the read. And obviously, we are coming up to the top of the hour. We do have a little game we like to play before the show is over, Vanessa. And of course, we can all reconvene
so
at a time that's convenient for all of us to talk about the power of our work together. But Relly, I'm going to let you lead the
yeah.
game here.
So Vanessa, this is what we call the lightning round. I'm actually going to change it a little bit. So just fill in the blank. Teams are all about,
Love.
ooh, good one.
That's a
Um,
radical. I'm going to
and then
say it.
actually, this is your question. What's the number one marker for an emotionally intelligent team?
Affirmation.
Affirmation. Yeah. And then just from yourself, because we always talk about recharging resilience, what do you do during the work day to recharge?
Oh, don't tell anyone, but I put my head down on my desk and nap for 20 minutes.
Beautiful. Well, Kathy knows, and with Daniel Goleman, I've been meditating as long as Daniel Goleman has been meditating, and so
Mm,
sometimes we
mm.
call that meditation versus sleep. I mean, it depends on
Yes, yes,
what level you're at
yes,
in
yes,
the
indeed.
brain.
Well, this has been a whirlwind of a conversation, Vanessa, and so much more to share. We hope you'll come back. And we know that everything that you have to share with us is just pure gold, and it is the gold standard for working with teams. And thank you for spending this gracious time with us today. And audience, Thank you for coming aboard with us and tuning in to tune up your performance every week here with Leadership Development News, for making us #1 these 20 years. We can't thank you enough.
Can I just say thank you? What a
Yeah.
pleasure to be with the two of you.
Absolutely.
What a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you to your audience. Appreciate
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Tune in next week to tune up your performance. Take care.